Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 4 of our diversity class, Diversity in the Family, where we are covering gender and sexuality this week. So, our first reading discussed masculinity norms in couple and family therapy. So, today, what I would like to do is translate some of this research on masculinity norms into actionable couple and family therapy practice. So, being very clear here, my aim is not to bash men. The aim of the article was not to bash men. It's to make the invisible scripts visible that so we can widen flexibility, well-being, and connection for all partners and family members. So perhaps, something you can think about here is if you've been in therapy or watched role plays or have engaged in therapy as a client, a observer, anything like that. If you have ever witnessed or experienced a man struggling to engage in therapy. So I want to normalize this, that if you have experienced this, maybe yourself or again witnessed this or anything, that friction is often socialization and not resistance. I think that's an important distinction or an important frame to put on it. So, masculinity socialization shapes help seeking, emotional expression, conflict strategies, parenting, and sexual dynamics. Treating these as individual deficits pathologizes people. Treating them as scripts creates reauthoring opportunity. So, here, a mantra that you can engage with is behavior makes sense in its social context. Mahalik and the other authors have operationalized conformity to masculine norms. So, through status, emotional control, dominance, risk taking, primacy of work, self reliance, playboy sexuality, power over women, and avoidance of femininity, you can think of these as situational rules men are rewarded for following. So, you can, so clinically, here you could translate he won't talk about feelings into he was trained that emotional control keeps him safe or respected. So that's a reframe that you could offer in the room with an individual. Like maybe you have a man sitting in front of you, or you are working with a system that has a man who is a member of the system. So we'll use these 7 scripts throughout this presentation, and what I'm going to do is go one by one with exact language that you can use to navigate the script, elicit the script, work with the script. So script 1 is emotional control. How this shows up is shutdown and conflict, discomfort with vulnerability, and somatic symptoms. So here, something you can do is validate. You could say something like, it makes sense you learned to contain emotion that kept you steady. You can expand by saying something like, if anger and fire are the only dials, if anger and being fine are the only dials, what's one middle dial word you could share today? You could also do some scaffolding. So you could try a 10-second headline feeling. You don't have to go into details. So you can do like just an emotional check-in. You can also do an enactment. So something you could direct your clients to do is to turn to your partner and share one headline emotion. The partner who's receiving that information just says thank you. And then you want them to avoid asking for longer narratives too early and just use headlines first. You're just trying to dip your toes into emotional expression. So then the second script is self-reliant. So the presentation is a reluctance to ask for help, kind of being lone wolf style. You can reframe this as self-reliance is strength, interdependence is leadership. And so something that you can bring into the room is you could ask something like, on a 0 to 10 scale, how costly is going solo right now? What one task would you delegate if self-reliance is a tool, not an identity? And then something you could direct to the family. How do you read his asking for help? Do you read it as weakness? Do you read it as teamwork? So to understand how this socialized script about men has kind of permeated the system and other members of the family. So script 3, primacy of work or being a provider. So provision equals protection in this script. Value, you can clarify values here by asking questions like what provide what, money or presence? What mix does this family need this season? You can build a shared calendar labeling provider time, like income, and provision time, being providing care and connection, being present. You can protect dignity where finances are tight while diversifying roles. So just some things you could do to, again, the goal here is to make these scripts more flexible because they're rigidly what's the word I'm looking for? Like leaned into, invested. I don't think that wasn't the right word I wanted. Okay, so script 4, risk taking and aggression. So here, what you want to do is assess for safety and utilize an IPV protocol first. So, something that you could bring in here is when your body surges, what's the mission? Is it to protect, to win, to be heard? And you can offer some active alternatives, some behavioral alternatives like cold water splash, the 90-second rule, which is like a cool down period, a 20-minute tactical pause with an explicit return time. If things are getting heated, we're going to time out, separate for 20 minutes, and with a commitment to return. Maybe 20 minutes is too short or something, so it's an agreed upon time where they have cooled down. There's some self-regulation skills that have been employed, and a return to hopefully some connection and understanding. So you can set some rules for fighting. So just keeping in mind here, I know I don't think y'all have had a couples class yet, but I just want to let you know that our goal or our belief, I guess, as couple and family therapists is not that couples shouldn't fight. It's learning how to fight well or fair or equitable. Fights, arguments, tension, struggles, those are inevitable. What we want to teach couples and families how to do, or systems, relationships how to do, is to navigate them in a way where people feel safe and that there's also some growth that happens after it. So setting these fight rules, there's no threats, no exit, and then time out for communication respect, but not abandonment. So those are some, examples that you could set. So script 5, dominance and decision authority. So the presentation here is unilateral decisions, interrupting, gatekeeping money or kids. So a reframe that you could offer here is you shoulder decisions to keep the ship steady. You can test shared leadership. So questions you could ask, which 2 domains could you co-captain this month? Being, quote, the decider is exhausting, and some ideas for ways of distributing authority. Because in many instances, this can be, this simple suggestion or option could be a threat to the person's identity. Like if that's where they get purpose, I would expect some questioning on that. Okay, script number 6, heterosexual performance or being a playboy. So here, this is quantity over closeness focus. So there may be a porn secrecy, some conquest language that is utilized. So what you want to do here is decouple someone's worth from performance. So you might ask things like, what counts as successful sex for both partners, all partners? You may want to introduce a menu of intimacy. So things like sensate focus. This is something that you'll learn in your sexuality class, sex therapy class. Non-goal touch. So, many times sex has a ending point or a goal. working with bringing in affirmations. So you want to address any betrayal or avoidance with clarity and repair pathways. So if there has been a betrayal, if there is some intimacy avoidance, and remember, intimacy isn't just sex, or like, I mean, what we would consider, penetrative sex or, I don't know, kind of the small box of what we might define as sex. Intimacy is also being emotionally vulnerable. There it is, intimacy is a wide range of behaviors and a positionality that relationships have. So here, understanding what the betrayal was or what is informing the avoidance, and then also having ways to repair, ways to create connection. That is a key here, because if you identify the betrayal or avoidance, then the logical next question is, okay, what do we do with this? So you should be prepared to provide that. Okay, the last script is an anti-femininity or homophobia script. So there's a contempt, how this presents is a contempt for softness. We police boys' emotions. There's anxiety around the LGBTQ community and any, possible connection, and meaning that they would a man would be inaccurately connected or be seen as a part of the community. So just, this very, very strict, rigid view of what is masculinity. So something to be a positionality that's important here is one of curiosity plus boundaries. So some questions you could ask: where did you learn softness is dangerous? What happened to men who showed softness? What would strength with tenderness look like? And potentially an exercise that you could offer with the family is having a strengths dictionary that includes care, humility, and repair. So again, broadening the definition of what is strength, and hopefully broadening the definition of what is masculine. Um, yeah. So the help-seeking paradox. So here, the script is that real men fix it themselves. So you want to um, lower barriers to help seeking by renaming it, maybe talking about it as coaching or strategy. You can offer a time-bounded trial. So have a 4-session experiment where you do something, like assign something where there's help-seeking behavior. And then you want to, you may already be using coaching at work or in sports, and therapy is ultimately a relationship coach. So you can see the places where like help seeking is happening, and maybe they can expand it into other areas of their life. So here is the 5-step intervention sequence for these, very restrictive, rigid scripts that are harmful for everyone ultimately. So you want to use this consistently, this intervention sequence. So first, you're going to identify the script. Then you want to validate its function. It has served a purpose. It's been protective. It has offered identity. It has offered purpose. You want to bring to the surface the costs of engaging with the script. Rigidity, a lack of connection, a lack of emotional ability to emote. You want to offer a flexibility plan, build a flexibility plan. How can we have strength be more inclusive of behaviors or a thought process or an emotional experience than just this box that you've been squeezed into. And then here you also want to work on, as for you as a therapist, anticipating any barriers to engaging in this process, and also identify supports. So as you're trying to anticipate these barriers, you're bringing out those barriers in the conversation and ideas of how to navigate those barriers. So something that you might say in therapy is, let's respect what this has done for you, this script, and design a second gear you can shift into when intimacy or safety calls for it. So how can we diversify your definition of this piece of you? Okay, so intersectionality and context. So masculinity scripts are shaped by social location. So an example here is with Black men, emotional control is survival with police. You don't pathologize this. You want to widen options safely. Um, you need to understand different social positions and also recognizing that masculinity is not a monolith, that we are also embedded in this system that sends messages about what masculinity is. Um, so we need to be aware of our own scripts that we've internalized while also helping clients to investigate, explore, expand the scripts that they have internalized. So here's just, some lines that you could use here, or, maybe just like a piece of reflection for you. Uh, you know, when a partner says something like, "Why won't you open up?" You may model or share a line like, "What would make 10 seconds feel safe today?" Like 10 seconds of opening up. Another thing that a partner might say is stop controlling. And an alternative to this is, where can we share the load this week? So just, again, some reframes, some language alternatives here that really change the perspective. So if some measurement and outcomes here, you can track flexibility through gauging things like willingness, safety, shared decisions. You can also graph small wins weekly. So you can use a brief 0 to 10 rating for willingness to try a new behavior, perceived safety during repairs, a weekly shared decision count. And what we measure, we protect. So you want to show trend lines to reinforce change. So here, just a pause if you'd like for some reflection. So we all carry gender socialization. I want you to notice who you may side with in vignettes, in role plays, in videos that you watch. Who may you be compelled to protect? You want to center equity, but not faux neutrality when power is uneven. So something that, a question that a supervisor might ask is when you're in a role play, or when you're actually in practicum, like, when did I collude with a script last week? What repair would I do now? So this is also just something that you could reflect with on your own. So some takeaways here: recognizing that scripts are functional. You want to start with respecting the script. You want to target flexibility over conformity, and you want to tie skills to valued identities. So, if a valued identity is a protector, how can we be more flexible, or how can we expand how we engage in that identity? So you want to close with action. Name one line you can try this week with a client who is a man. Just something to think about here. And like I said, recognizing that scripts are functional, you want to widen flexibility and measure wins. So that's our first reading of the week. And then we had our reading on feminist and postmodern family therapy, discussing issues of power, gender, and justice. So this paper argued that we can't treat systems in a vacuum. When power is uneven, neutrality can side with the status quo. So the authors bring social constructionism together with feminist ethics so we can act without becoming authoritarian ourselves. So a common misconception is that feminism is only about women, but really it's about analyzing gendered power and intersecting oppressions to promote just relationships for all genders. So some core premises. So again, this article takes a social constructionist frame. The language that we use shapes our realities. Power shapes which realities get oxygen or get airtime. Intersectionality warns us not to isolate gender from other social locations. And keeping in mind that therapy itself is not neutral, our practices distribute voice and silence. So like an example here with power and knowledge is a good mother script is often defined by dominant middle class norms. So how we internalize and define what a good mother is, for example, is uh, largely defined by what a middle class norm would be. Okay, so neutrality, partiality, and ethical solidarity. So the authors here ask us to inspect neutrality. If one partner controls money, speech time, and consequences, equalizing airtime isn't taking sides, it's basic safety and fairness. So some ethical solidarity, what ethical solidarity means is aligning with relational equity and nonviolence while remaining curious about all voices. So something you could use in therapy is I'm going to slow us down so we can hear the person who's had less space, because equity is a ground rule here. So mapping power in the room, you're going to be assessing things like who speaks the most, who gets interrupted, who defines the problem, what are the material levers, which discourses dominate. And so the positionality that you're taking is who do I turn to, who do I affirm, who might I have a tendency to want to rescue. So before intervening, you want to map interactional and structural power. You want to track airtime and interruption patterns. Name material levers because money and documents often govern choice. You want to surface dominant discourses that shape shame and obligation. And you want to include yourself in the map. Who are you looking at? Who gets your clarifying questions? So a prompt that you could, like a self-check prompt, is to pause the video and list 3 power indicators you can reliably track in your next section. So these are just things that you can practice as you are starting to work with people in practicum, doing role plays, that you are reflecting on how you're navigating power in the room. Okay, use of self, transparency, and accountability. The authors of this article advocate for explicit commitments in session. You want to use process talk to redistribute voice and repair quickly when you amplify dominance. You want to consider judicious self-disclosure to normalize equity practices, but keep it brief and purpose tied. You always want to ask yourself before you choose to self-disclose, does this disclosure increase safety and voice for the least heard? So very much from an equity standpoint here. You also want to use deconstructive questions to loosen common sense rules. So if you ultimately, common sense rules are the dominant rules. What we consider common sense is very much culturally bound. It is very much politically bound. So you want to understand these dominant rules that, again, are influenced by dominant norms or social norms. You want to mirror concrete interactional facts, so interruptions, tone, posture, to make inequity visible without shaming. You want to name the discourse, not the person, as the problem, then ask for counter stories to grow alternatives. This will make a lot of sense for those of you who haven't had Theories 2 yet, or maybe I'm going to guess none of you have had Theories 2 yet, because I think you take this in your first semester. But these are all components or tenets of narrative family therapy. So the authors emphasize where coercive control or violence exists, symmetry assumptions are harmful. So you want to screen your system separately, prioritizing safety, and you also want to avoid conjoint formats that endanger the survivor. So if IPV has ever been a part of the system, you need to assess for safety first and foremost. And then equity here means unambiguous alignment with nonviolence and autonomy. That's your positionality. So intersectionality and practice, gender never shows up alone. A partner's quote unquote non-compliance may reflect shift work or immigration risks. You want to bring structures into the formulation and into your homework. So you are not prescribing middle class solutions to working class problems. So you ask, don't assume about positionality. You want to watch for stacked silence. A one down partner at home may also be a one down person socially. You want to name any structural constraints that exist, and you want to adapt your task to material realities of things like childcare, transport. So you always want to make sure that any tasks that you assign take these um, environmental and structural realities into consideration. So a power timeline is it externalizes who holds sway when and links shifts to context. This can help couples and families discover conditions that grow equity and replicate them on purpose. So, an example task here would be rotating who decides domains when remaining or while maintaining joint transparency. So if, one person in a system has decision power consistently in one area, having another person have that decision power at another time, just to make that more explicit and to shake up the system a little bit. All right, so common pitfalls that we engage in as therapists is we pathologize the loud one down partner. So we need to reframe this as protest and target upstream inequity. So a person who can seem very vocal in therapy, sometimes we get frustrated with them. We want equal airtime for everyone. Sometimes this may be one of the only spaces that they're able to speak up. Staying neutral in IPV, you want to replace this with survivor-centered safety and accountability. If you ignore class or immigration constraints, you want to adapt goals to material realities, like I said in the last slide. Speaking for marginalized members is a pitfall. Instead, you want to build their direct voice, check with them, not about them. So pitfall patterns are predictable. Use any notes, like progress notes that you may have, to flag when you're drifting into them. So this necessitates insight, reflexivity, using supervision. So your fix is usually to widen the context and re-aim the focus to equity and safety. All right, so measuring change beyond symptoms. Here, you want to track process outcomes, not just distress scores. So we're not just using the OQ45. We're not just using other measures that are just looking at symptoms. Equity is visible. So this is in the form of who speaks, who decides, how repair happens, and which stories now anchor the relationship. So some ethics in action here. Make your ethical frame transparent. The clarity is protective for clients and for you. So having this be clear is protective for everyone in the therapeutic relationship. You want to normalize micro repairs and collaborate on safety-minded referrals. Okay, so that's the end of that reading. Next, we read Green et al. In their 2009 study on marriage and family therapists' comfort working with gay and lesbian clients in specific. So what I'm going to do is summarize the study's purpose, the methods, their key findings, and then what it may mean for our clinical training and practice, especially through a postmodern and socioculturally attuned lenses. Okay, so historically, sexual minority clients have faced pathologizing discourses in mental health. In 2009, professional organizations had long depathologized homosexuality, but training quality and therapist attitudes varied widely across programs and regions. So for those of you who maybe haven't taken a DSM class or your assessment course yet, we are currently on the DSM-5 text revised. So that's the version. In the DSM-3, so I'd say maybe like 4 or 5 versions ago, homosexuality was listed as a diagnosis. So we're not super far removed as a field from seeing homosexuality or being gay as a diagnosis. So the authors asked, how comfortable do MFTs feel working with gay and lesbian clients, and what predicts that comfort? This matters because therapist comfort levels through micro behaviors, language, and clinical choices can either expand safety and alliance or constrict it. All right, the study focused on 4 questions. 1, what is the overall level of comfort among MFTs working with gay and lesbian clients? 2, which factors predict greater comfort? 3, which factors predict lower comfort? 4, do practice setting and region matter? And based on prior literature, the authors expected that affirmative training exposure and personal contact with lesbian, gay, and bisexual people would predict higher comfort, more conservative religious or political views and limited exposure would predict lower comfort. So they used a cross-sectional survey of MFTs and in some versions, advanced trainees. Participants completed measures of comfort working with gay and lesbian clients, along with demographic, training, and belief variables. So keep in mind, surveys capture associations, not causation. Yet with a broad national sample, they can show reliable patterns we should translate into training and supervision. So I just want to take a second here for those of you who may not be familiar with the difference between association and causation. Association is like two factors or two variables going in the same direction over time. Like, so a classic example here is like um, ice cream sales increase at the same rate as shark attacks. So those things have nothing to do with one another. But if you looked at a line graph over time, they both go up, with the like mediator being that it's summer and people are like in the water more, they're warm, they're wanting ice cream. Causation is that variable A causes an outcome. So just keep that in mind as you do readings. All right, so core variables included comfort. So was measured by self-report. In this, the self-reported comfort of working with gay and lesbian clients, training and exposure, which was measured through coursework, supervised hours with LGB. So clients, specific LGBTQ plus trainings. And I also just want to be clear that, the LGBTQ plus community population is very diverse. And sometimes we only look at slices of this. So this study specifically looked at like the gay and lesbian slices. So personal contact, knowing or caring about LGB. So again, LGB in particular, people, religious and political orientation. This was self-described conservatism or liberalism, any religious commitment. They also looked at demographics and context, how old, what the age, gender, region, and practice setting was. And these analyses examined which predictors uniquely related to comfort after controlling for other variables. So overall, respondents reported moderate to high comfort, but with notable variability. Many felt quite comfortable, while a meaningful minority reported lower comfort, especially where training and exposure were limited. So think about our program. Where do you get direct exposure to LGBTQ clients and supervision? Where might some gaps be? So thinking about your time here at Alliant. 3 patterns stood out. The first is that affirmative training and supervised contact predicted higher comfort. Not just one lecture, it was sustained exposure and supervision mattered. The second is personal contact, knowing and or caring about, knowing and, I guess, caring about or any LGB people predicted higher comfort consistent with contact theory. The third is that conservative religious beliefs and ideologies predicted lower comfort even when training was controlled. Age, gender, and regional effects were smaller and mixed once training and beliefs were in the model. So a takeaway here is that comfort is teachable, but it's not only about content. Identity, beliefs, and lived relationships also shape the room. So therapists in setting and regions with more LGBTQ plus visibility and resources tended to report greater comfort, likely reflecting both training opportunities and social norms. So within the supervision climate, being explicitly affirmative versus avoidant also aligned with comfort. So here you can use this to advocate for training ecology and supervision that are inclusive and diverse, and recognizing that culture matters. And this is not just individual goodwill. These are systems that need to bring this into account. So through a postmodern and socioculturally attuned lens, the knowledge power, these are dominant discourses about sexuality that shape what feels quote unquote normal in therapy. Comfort increases when clinicians are immersed in counter discourses that center LGBTQ plus lived experiences. Isomorphism is very simply supervisors modeling to their supervisees what they want their supervisees to do and be and how they want them to like their positionality in therapy. So the supervisor supervisee relationship is meant to model for the therapist client relationship where the supervisee and the therapist are the same person. So, in terms of isomorphism, program culture mirrors practice. Affirmative supervision predicts affirmative micro practices. Intersectionality, comfort isn't uniform. Interactions with religion, race, class, and region create different comfort profiles, so training must meet these nuances. Comfort shows up in micro practices that either widen or shrink safety. You want to build these into your intake. You want language that asks, what name and pronoun should I use? How do you describe your sexual orientation? In terms of assumptions, use partners instead of gendered terms until invited otherwise. So instead of saying boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, things like that, use gender neutral um, language. Contextualize distress. You want to normalize minority stress. Don't individualize what's social. Some strengths here. You want to explore sources of pride, community, and resistance. These are the strengths that you want to elicit. And then do some family mapping. You want to include chosen family. Ask who is, quote, in the client's support system. These are small, repeatable acts that communicate attunement. Ethically, competence includes affirmative knowledge and skill. If you lack it, seek consultation and training. Don't transfer the burden to clients. Avoid covert value conflicts that degrade care. If a genuine conflict exists, follow consultation and referral standards to prevent harm while ensuring continuity. Document training efforts, supervision, and client-centered rationales. Lastly, for this, some limitations. Self-report surveys can inflate perceived comfort. Cross-sectional data cannot prove causation. LGB comfort in 2009 does not automatically generalize to the full LGBTQIA plus spectrum. Future directions, you want to measure observed behaviors, maybe longitudinal change with training and intersectional analyses across race, class, region, and religion. So again, 3 takeaways here. 1, comfort is both relational and trainable. Sustained exposure plus supervision moves the needle. The second is that beliefs and contact matter. Programs must address identity, values, and discourse, not just content. And then the third takeaway is that micro practices signal safety. So language, normalization of minority stress, and inclusion of chosen family are high leverage points. All right, last reading, I believe. So revisiting the sexual genogram. Fun fact, the authors of this article, I went to my doctoral program with them. So Dr. Bellos was my student supervisor. He graduated from my doctoral program a few years before I did. So just fun facts here. Okay, so sexuality is a frequent driver of relational satisfaction and conflict. Mapping it systematically reveals patterns like family rules about silence, double standards, or shame that often travel across generations. It helps us assess risk and safety without pathologizing diversity, centering consent and power, and keeps the focus on meaning making and context rather than on a narrow behavior checklist. So the original genogram was created by Hoff and Berman in 1986. This was pioneering, but it reflected its era. It was heterosexual in nature. They lived in the binary, and they often pathologized non-normative identities by marking them as deviations. So what the authors here did is they wanted to recenter inclusion, simplify relationship lines, and explicitly have power, consent, and context in the foreground. So first, so in terms of the updates, represent gender as the person names it. Avoid assigning based on presentation or legal status. Second, capture sexual and romantic orientation in the client's own words. The key shift is parity. All identities are represented, not just those outside heterosexual norms. This reduces othering and aligns with a depathologizing stance. Relationship lines are streamlined, solid for committed unions, regardless of legal status, dashed for dating or affairs, and hash marks to indicate separation and termination. For consensual non-monogamy, name the structure explicitly. Add a qualitative annotation of the sexual climate. How is sex talked about? Is it celebrated, shamed, or avoided? This is often pivotal in meaning making. Begin with a standard genogram scaffold. So you want people, connections, notable events. These are all in a standard traditional genogram. You want to layer the sexuality data next. Identities, relationship structures and transitions, sexual climate, and any salient sexual narratives or turning points. Then slow down to co-construct meaning. What patterns emerge? What expectations point to choice and resilience? What stories feel true and useful now? The companion timeline is a powerful narrative tool that tracks critical experiences across time. You want to invite clients to mark formative messages, attractions, joys, confusions, harms, disclosures, and repairs. Contextualize each item for consent, power, secrecy, and meaning. The goal isn't exhaustive detail, but pattern clarity and client-led meaning. You want to gain informed consent and set collaborative boundaries. Clients choose what to include. You want to screen for IPV and sexual violence. Do not conduct conjoint sexual mapping when coercion is active. Work within the client's window of tolerance. Resource, pause, and pendulate as needed. Be judicious in documentation. Clarify what will be recorded, where, and why. You want to let clients lead with their own words and values. You want to attend to cultural, religious, and structural forces that shape sexual rules and risks. Make power explicit. Who initiates? Who declines safely? Who feels obligated? Who fears consequences? You want to anchor your clinical formulations in consent, equity, and mutual attunement, not in conformity to dominant scripts. So some pitfalls that can happen is pathologizing difference, pushing too fast without adequate consent or stabilization, and softening language that hides coercion. So be precise about consent and power. Document minimally and securely. Consider storing diagrams separately with client permission. One thing I want to note here, so in the piece about pacing too fast, remembering that as you do therapy, you're going to get more comfortable in discomfort. And sometimes we take for granted that our level of comfort or our level of tolerance is potentially here, and clients' levels are here. So when we're like, yeah, we're going to talk about sex and positions and conversations and preferences and kinks and all of these things, like you might be like, yeah, this is just another Tuesday at 2 p.m. That might be, oh my gosh, so embarrassing or like so vulnerable for your client. So you're always wanting to check for attunement there. All right, so here is an activity if you want to pause and engage in something yourself for some experiential learning. So you can privately sketch a personal map using codes that only you recognize. So this is just for, confidentiality. Notice your internal climate and regulate as needed. This is optional for your eyes only. You don't have to do this. I want you to, if you choose to engage in it, you can journal about messages you inherited, exceptions you created, and how these shape your clinical stance. If distress arises, be sure to pause, ground yourself, and reach out to any appropriate support. So just something if you want to kind of engage in this experientially. So something to note in regard to telehealth, you want to negotiate documentation explicitly with the client. In telehealth, you want to co-create maps via whiteboard or shared documents. Allow clients to redact in real time. Keep framing language visible. Consent, equity, mutuality, joy, safety to normalize values guiding the work. You also want to talk with the client about how you're storing any sort of activities or notes and get their consent for that as well. So key takeaways here, make inclusion and power awareness structural, prioritize meaning, context, and consent, leverage timelines to illuminate the past and author preferred futures. Then let your formulations drive targeted, paced, and ethical interventions.